For the first time, I have a book that I'm not entirely sure I know what the title of it is supposed to be. I believe the title, the full title anyway, I know that much, is Beyond Entrepreneurship 2.0, Turning Your Business into an Enduring Great Company. The short title of it is B 2.0, BE 2.0. So I don't actually know if it's supposed to be B 2.0, BE 2.0, or something else. At any rate, it's an interesting book. It's by Jim Collins and Bill Lazier. Jim Collins is the guy who, if that name sounds familiar, he wrote Good to Great and has sort of solidified himself as the person who has done the most research about what it is that makes really good companies into really great companies. I had read Good to Great several years ago and thought it was very interesting. I don't know that it was very applicable. And so this particular book, B 2.0, is an updated version of Beyond Entrepreneurship that I think was published at some point in the early 2000s or maybe even in the late 90s. The edition that is the second edition of this was first published in 2020 and has, I think, even been slightly updated since then, even. But it has new commentary in it about sort of what their thoughts are based off of what they wrote, I don't know, 10 or 15 years prior when the book first came out. If this is a sort of book that doesn't sound particularly interesting to you because either you're not an entrepreneur, or you're not really in business, or you're not really in a position to think about those sorts of things, I want to implore you to stick around here for a second because I had sort of the same thought myself, and I actually ended up getting out something much different from this book that we'll talk about here in a second. Anyway, I gave this book a solid 3 stars. I think it's well researched. I think it's a little bit dangerous in some parts. I think it's the sort of book that a lot of people, particularly in this sort of Silicon Valley tech bro kind of hustle culture world that so many people are in, I think that it can actually be a little harmful to some people to sort of tell them it's like, oh, and I'll give you a good example of this because it's a good segue. The first thing that I highlighted was relatively early on in the book about some brief background about a fellow named Bill who was a good mentor and a professor that worked alongside Mr. Collins. And he says, and I highlighted here, Bill believed that most people fail to achieve their audacious big dreams because they don't fully commit at the critical moment. And I get that. I get the sentiment of that. I respect the sentiment of that. I just don't know that it's necessarily great advice. I think it can be both true and untrue at the same time. And I think part of what makes it a little uncomfortable for me is that there are people who will surely take that sort of advice and sort of feed in with it sentiment similar to that and pursue business goals that are either unrealistic or dangerous to them and their families. And I think that there's not a lot of nuance in a lot of these books about how people are supposed to prepare themselves for these sorts of things in their life. I think if you told somebody, okay, you're going to go out, you have a business idea, and you want to make that dream a reality, the smart thing to do would be to have things like 6 months of income saved up. So that way, if you run into income problems, that you won't starve or that you can continue to pay the rent or the mortgage or whatever. And I don't know that a lot of these books kind of skip over that part of it. And I think it's something detrimental in it. But, there was more to this from a personal standpoint than I think some of the professional stuff. And that could be because my outlook on this has shifted over time, that I increasingly don't care so much about the growing a big business with lots of employees kind of thing, but instead focus more on improving myself. And there was a section in here called Build a Meaningful Life by Building Relationships. And he he quotes his friend Bill here. He says, "You can go at life as a series of transactions, or you can go at life building relationships," Bill once told me. "Transactions can give you success, but only relationships make for a great life." "How do you know if you have a great relationship?" I asked. Bill thought about it for a moment, then answered, "If you were to ask each person in the relationship who benefits more from the relationship, both would answer, 'I do.'" And I highlighted that because I think that it was both a little bit of a selfish way of looking at it, but also a really wonderful way of looking at it, particularly if you are married and view your partnership in this way, that is less of a transactional success about things and um, more as a partnership as it should be. I think that if you imagine it from the perspective of um, your client relations, your employer relations, your colleagues, even just your friends, even uh, that the people that you interact with get more than what it feels like you give. But if you both give a lot, and I think there's probably a lot of this that circles back to what is sometimes referred to as servant leadership in more religious and Christian circles. I think that there is an element of that or a strain of that that has been secularized for business, particularly in managerial circles where people sort of, I don't want to say that they pretend, but that they sort of view their management style as, if I can sort of serve my employees in a useful way, then good things will happen in that. But I also think that there's a perverse version of that where a lot of supervisors look at their employees and say, well, if they can serve me, then good things will come of that, in sort of a benevolent lordship kind of way. Um, but I think that that's an interesting responsibility. I think that it's something that people would do well to perceive beyond the scope of what this book was probably thinking about in terms of business relationships, but thinking about this in terms of all your friendships, of all of your relationships, including your marriage, if the case may be. Speaking of responsibility, there was a nugget that I highlighted here. It says, does the person see work as a job or a responsibility? And so I think this is kind of getting back into what I was just talking about how some supervisors and managers can look at their employees as the perverse servant leadership model. And so if you ask yourself, does the person see work as a job or a responsibility? The part that I highlighted here says, the right people in key seats understand that they don't have jobs, in quotes, they have responsibilities, in italics. They grasp the difference between their task list and their true responsibilities. A great doctor doesn't merely have the job of performing procedures, but embraces responsibility for the health of the patient. A great coach doesn't merely have the job of preparing workouts, but embraces responsibility for building his or her players into better people. A great teacher doesn't merely have the job of being in the classroom from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., but embraces responsibility for every child's learning. I highlighted that because it is useful to be cognizant of that from a management standpoint, which that they're talking about, that if you're managing people, that you should try to develop those people in ways that allows them to, perform responsibly in their positions. I, however, highlighted this because I think that it's useful, even just as myself as an individual person. We all sort of chase this notion that we perceive. I hate the word passion, but I think for most people to understand this is that people sort of chase after a passion of things. I'm not a big believer in the passion argument. I don't think there's a lot of people out there in most jobs most of the time that can have passion for what it is that they do. I just find it sort of strange that we would think that, I don't know, do we think that police officers have a passion for, I don't know, administering, the Miranda rights to every rapist that they catch? I don't know. I mean, I think that every job has things that people like about it, and that there's things that people don't like about it. And some jobs have more of that than others. There's a very few select number of people who are sort of in the class of people who are, it's sort of like you can have a passion for cooking, and it's really easy to see that when you're watching all of the celebrity chefs, right? Not everyone gets to be the celebrity chef. Somebody has to be the guy who works at the Applebee's, right? Does that person have passion for cooking? Maybe. Does that job beat that passion out of them? These things are complicated in ways that get simplified way too much, and they get oversimplified to the point that they become just almost banal. But understanding that you have a responsibility can help a person sort of think about their job. And it might help you think about what it is that you do from day to day. And it might help you think about, whether or not that the sort of stuff that you're doing is the right thing to be doing. And there was another nugget that I highlighted here that was really interesting to me that was sort of in a similar vein. He was talking about a time that he interviewed people who work at the Cleveland Clinic, specifically physicians. And he says, quote, "After the procedure and throughout my visit, I asked Cleveland Clinic medical professionals what it took to bring them to, of all places, Cleveland, Ohio. And the answer was always the same, because they wanted to do the best work with the best people in their field." And again, top people performing at their top of their game in the top of their professions is a noble goal. I want to be there myself. I think about this a lot. I also think about the fact that a lot of careers don't have a very clear goal destinations for that. I think it's pretty clear within the medical community, like who is the best neurosurgeon. I think that most neurosurgeons could probably draw up a name or two of people that they admire or think that are at the top of their game. I think that you could do that for any sort of medical professional. But at some point, things get a little more murky, right? Who is the best EMT? And I think that you could probably make an argument within a department, maybe within a city, maybe even within a region or even like a state. You could make that claim based off of, we do this with teachers, right? The such and such state teacher of the year kind of award. So you can have some criteria for this, but it's based on some pretty soft skills, right? Like usually if you're the best teacher in a state, it's because somebody nominated you. It doesn't necessarily mean that there was some empirical research project that investigated every teacher in the state that year to determine who was the best teacher. It is a little bit of luck involved in some of those things, but in a lot of fields, particularly things that are very analytical, there is definitely a clear path to determine what makes you the best at something. I think a person could look at things like the best cartoonists, best writers, best authors in certain genres of things. There's obviously a difference between a Stephen King and a David McCullough. Best in narrative nonfiction, best in biography, best in even figuring out the best of the people in certain specific subgenres. So the best in history or the best in autobiography, but best in military history or best in presidential autobiographies, for example. Those sorts of things can get pretty specific, and you can see how a person can rise to the top of a lot of these things. And a person who rises to the top of saying being the best at best author or best researcher or historian of military history probably doesn't care a whole lot about being the best in presidential history. And so those things seem very clear to me. The Cleveland Clinic medical professionals being at the top of their game with other people who are at the top of their game seems reasonable, right? It does not seem reasonable, however, for a lot of people to say the same thing for lots of other jobs. I'm thinking about things like insurance agents, right? Car salesmen. Are there ways to sort of go to bigger and better insurance companies or bigger and better car dealerships? Yes, certainly. Are there ways of sort of speculating about what makes them more valuable? Usually that comes down to money. Whereas with medical professionals, I don't think that so much as money as a neutral indicator of value, where it would be for a car salesman, where that's just like, well, they moved a lot of product. Physicians need outcomes, or they need research, or they need groundbreaking publications, and so those things don't exist in a lot of career fields. And I think about that a lot in my position as sort of a website professional, a writer, somebody who does research for a living. That it's really hard, right? It is really hard to determine like what makes the best of something, or would make me better at some component of one of these things that I do, or one part of my career. I devote so much time and energy thinking about this. Sometimes I feel like maybe I devote too much time and energy to it. But just trying to determine even the criteria. There's not even just agreed upon criteria for a lot of things about what makes somebody better than somebody else, or in a better position within a profession. In addition to that, they talk about the United States military, and he says Collins writes, even at the very top of the U.S. military, multi-star general officers make vastly less than many corporate CEOs by a factor of 5, 10, or 20. Whenever I hear corporate board members say, well, we need to pay tens of millions to get real leadership talent at the top, I find myself thinking about general officers who are responsible for thousands of lives and manage huge strategic risks while accomplishing difficult national objectives. If it really is about financial incentives, how do we explain the fact that some of the best leaders in the world serve in our military, or in our schools, or at the best medical centers, or in social movements fueled by the energy of thousands of idealistic young people? This again gets to this notion of impact and that people want to be around other talented people. And if a person can sort of find their tribe, if I can borrow a word and mix some metaphors here from Seth Godin, people can find their tribe and a culture that fits them well, then great. I think that when we talk a lot about company culture in a lot of places, we come around to this notion that things can be toxic, either because they work too many hours, or it's too hard, or it's dominated by men, or it's racist or sexist or something, somewhat, I don't want to say tangible, but something a little more documentable. That we start to make notions that every place should be a sort of work culture that you yourself or an individual person would want to work at. And I don't think that's necessarily fair. I think there's a big difference between working at, say, Anthem Insurance than Google, or working for IBM or Apple or Microsoft versus, Goldman Sachs. These things all have different cultures, and I think for very good reasons. I think they attract different kinds of people. And so if you can be attracted into a job that's either like at a school or in the military or something like that, then great, right? I think that most people, most of the time, and this is the point that I was driving at here, is that we all need to be able to reach our own level of success that is in a place that is our own kind of comfort and our own kind of vibe. And not every place has to be every place to everyone. And sometimes you're going to find places that just aren't the right fit. I think we've all probably seen people or know people, or even yourself, who end up in a job someplace that you bounce out of pretty quickly because you realize that it just quite wasn't what you needed. He writes in here as well, we live in a world rich in success, but impoverished in meaning. I love that line. A life of relentless work without meaning is brutal and dark. Most of us will never have the depth of love in our daily work that Manchester had with his fellow Marines. But we can move closer to it by building a culture where people depend on people. And in so doing, you will give people something of immeasurable value, work that matters. And that is truly great. For background context there, he was talking about a Marine who was in Vietnam. And they also pointed out, too, something that I did not know about Vietnam in here, is that militarily, the United States crushed it. That militarily, our supply chains were excellent. Our troop movement was excellent. Our ability to beat back enemies in combat was excellent. Our technology was excellent and superior. But militarily, we did everything far better than the Viet Cong in the Vietnam War. The problem was that we didn't have a focus, that there was no recognizable goal amongst the people that were fighting, except amongst the Viet Cong who were fighting for their country. And we see that sort of thing happen throughout history repeatedly, where people who have sort of a common purpose to things like, say, Afghanistan, or even the United States in the American Revolution against the British, always seem to do better than those that don't, even against people who are vastly more equipped or staffed or ready to have resources to deploy to a lot of these things. And so I just love this notion about we live in a world rich in success, but impoverished in meaning. And I think that having written, I think this portion of the book was actually written, 10, 15 years ago. And so the fact that it is still prescient today tells you everything that you need to know about a lot of where we are as a culture and where we are in our work, particularly as we continue to value our work above all else. Our work is increasingly the only thing that a lot of people have in their life. Maybe they have a spouse or some kids or something, but by and large, most people define themselves as just what it is that they do for a living. In fact, it's sort of the default thing that people ask of somebody when you make small talk and you meet someone. It's like, "Hi, I'm Justin. What do you do?" With the intent of hearing from somebody about what it is that they do for a living. And I don't know that that's healthy for us, and I don't know how we change that. I think it's going to certainly be a cultural shift that might happen within my lifetime. I don't know, and it probably does need to happen. They talk a little bit in here as well about priorities and goals, and this is kind of where I wanted to get at for people who even aren't really in the business mindset of things. They talk about a business leader who sort of did everything right, but still did everything wrong. And one of the things that I highlighted here was the boss had no clear priorities. He constantly hurled lists of 10 to 20 action items at people, telling them, quote, all of them are top priority. He also writes in a couple bullet points later, after the company reached a plateau of success at about 15 million in revenues and 75 employees, the supervisor refused to move forward with anything new, bold, or risky. The company stagnated and ambitious people left. And I highlighted those two things because I have had this conversation. I can remember having a conversation with a boss like this many years ago, who would hand me things and say, okay, well, here's our top 5 priorities. And I can remember even being kind of probably a butt-headed 20-something to be like, well, which one is the priority? Because priority, by definition, can only be the one priority. You can't have more than one priority. You can have one, because priority, by definition, means it is the priority. And so whenever I see something like that, I like the notion that I feel like I'm the only person sometimes that recognizes that. And I think increasingly more people recognize it, except all the people who need to recognize it don't recognize it. And so I like seeing those sorts of things in books that I know get read by people in those sorts of positions. There was a nugget in here as well about what makes for effective corporate leadership, and talking a little bit more about how the supervisor could have done things better. And it basically boils down to authenticity, decisiveness, focus, personal touch, hard and soft people skills, communication, and being ever forward. And there's a lot to unpack there. I don't want to get into it here, but this was part of what makes this book, I think, unique and special and well researched, is that it puts names to things that are otherwise relatively hard to define about what makes a good leader, and combining these things with a leadership style and a person's leadership function to be authentic and decisive, to be focused and be a monotasker and to know what it is that you're doing. To have a personal touch with things. I remember having a conversation earlier with a friend who was talking about a job that they were interested in, and their concern that they were trying to solve in this company was that they had a corporate headquarters, which was relatively small, and they had lots of people who managed properties in other locations around a region. And the people who were the property managers at these other locations around the region felt disconnected from the sort of the corporate HQ. And they were trying to figure out how to do that. And I think that when I thought about that initially, I was like, well, I'm sure they've done all the stupid things like trying to bring those people into the office, when in reality, the corporate HQ really needs to be the ones that are out sort of in the field, so to speak. And being able to do that is both a hard and a soft people skill, and to be able to communicate with those people in a useful way gives it kind of a nice touch that makes for better leadership, I think. Jim Collins also writes in here, the choice is not between hands-on or hands-off. In our research, the entrepreneurs who led their companies from startups into some of the greatest corporations in history generally had both a hands-on style and an empowering style. This is me talking here. This gets into some context about micromanaging and whether or not what level of micromanagement is too much. He writes, no matter how big their companies became, they remained closely connected to their people, hyper-aware of facts on the ground, and directly engaged in strategic imperatives. If you lose your voracious curiosity about tactical details, if you lose passionate interest in people and how they are feeling, and if you insulate yourself in the protective cocoon of executive comforts, you may well wake up one day to discover your company has already entered a doom loop of decline and self-destruction. Again, this is speaking specifically about companies, but I think this works just as well for individual people. I think that if you woke up yourself, let's presume for sake of argument here, that you're not an entrepreneur, that you don't have a team of anybody that you manage, maybe except an intern, that if you sort of became, less curious about the details, or that you just sort of didn't care so much about those details, if you started to insulate yourself with comforts of things, people do this with all sorts of stuff, including food and any number of other vices. Alcohol is a big one. And that if you start to lose passionate interest in the people that you're working with, or even the people in your life, like your spouse or your friends, that you may well enter yourself into a doom loop. I think if you were a human that did this, we would call you depressed. And if you're a business, they call you a doom loop of decline and self-destruction. But I think that works just as well for individual people. And I think it's worth keeping that in the forefront of things, because ultimately, what is a business if not but a collection of people who have all these same sorts of faults and issues? And he also writes, just as giving people positive reinforcement tends to increase their performance, so does the presence of challenge and high expectations. Good teachers have always known that students generally want to be challenged, and that they generally respond favorably to high expectations. Again, totally applicable to business, and you can see how that works if you're a manager and things. I think it also works well for individual people. Again, if you think back for a moment about sort of the best teachers that you ever had, they're probably the ones that held very high standards for you. They had very high standards for the detail of things that you're doing. I have written before about my 7th grade English teacher, Scott Vanoy, who would always, I was always so strong in English language arts skills throughout my entire educational career. I never really had to try very hard. Except for some reason, he would give me B's and C's in places that I was expecting an A without really that much effort. And I just don't know. I even still don't know to this day what it was that he was looking for, that he wanted me to do. But, having those high expectations for ourselves can allow us to grow our own skills. That could be for anything. If it could be as much as just learning a new hobby, like gardening or playing the guitar, having the ability to focus in on those things, challenge ourselves, and do it in a deep and meaningful way can really improve our lives, I think, and improve the performance that we bring to whatever it is that we do. And this gets into some of the nuggets that I was getting at earlier in this, when I introduced this whole show, which is that we start to get into vision, mission, and purpose. And if you think about your company vision statements and mission statements and purpose statements, I usually just skip right over that crap. For some reason or another, I gave this particular book a shot, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to stick with this. And I came away from it, and I thought to myself, this vision, mission, and purpose stuff can actually be really useful for people individually. That it doesn't have to be sort of a corporate. You see how it can have value for corporate leadership, but it can actually also be really useful for individuals. He writes here, vision isn't necessary to make money. You can certainly create a profitable business without it. And there are plenty of people who have made a lot of money, yet have no compelling vision. But if you want to do more than just make a lot of money, if you want to build an enduring great company, then you need a vision. And I can actually go back and rewrite this and say, if you want to make a lot of money, and if you want to build an enduring great career or life or hobby or marriage or relationship or whatever it might be, then you need a vision for that. And I started thinking about visions and mission and purpose, and working through some of this, I came away with probably about an hour that I sat down and I was like, you know what? Initially, I was like, okay, well, my vision is to make the best websites in the world, right? And I thought about that for a second. I was like, you can't have the vision to make the best websites or pages in the world because the web can't even define what that means. Think about that. It's like, well, what is the best whatever? Is it the best shopping webpage? How do you measure it? Is it based on sales? Is it based on e-commerce? Is it based on donations? Is it based on page views? How do you define what is the best webpage in the world, and what makes the best stove or the best bicycle in the world versus the best webpage? Some of these things, you can define these things, right? or at least within categories of things. And I don't know that anybody has really sat down and tried to define what makes the best web page in the world. And that's something that I actually continue to think about, and hopefully I can put some time into thinking about that at some point in the future. But he goes on to write that vision statements are core beliefs and principles. They're a philosophy of life. And that in itself was where I got the notion of like, you know what? Suddenly having a philosophy for life or of life is much more valuable for an individual person than it is for a business. And he writes, the benefits of vision, Collins writes, let's now turn our attention to the 4 primary benefits of corporate vision. And I'm going to come out and say that you can assume this is the 4 primary benefits of just having any vision. Vision forms the basis of extraordinary human effort. Vision provides a context for strategic and tactical decisions. 3, shared vision creates cohesion, teamwork, and community. And 4, vision lays the groundwork for the company to evolve past dependence on a few key individuals. And this is when I started thinking about what my vision would be for things. And I realized as I started doing it that I kind of have conflicting input about it. I'm a little all over the place on some of this. And I don't know that it is, I don't know that it's good for me. Because he writes in here too, the essence of vision is that a good vision consists of core values and beliefs, purpose, and mission. And so when I sat down and I thought, okay, well, what are my vision statements here? I actually came up with several, and you could have several. Lots of companies, a lot of the examples they give in the book actually are companies that have several different vision statements. Some of them are very specific. Some of them I find to be very vague, and I'm not really sure why he thinks they're so good. But what I came up with for myself was that I believe business should be an act of friendship. I believe in making the best of whatever I'm writing in the world. I believe in relentless self-improvement. I believe in serving the reader with everything that they need. I believe in being unique, ever forward, with an advancement of standards and enjoyment. And I believe in avoiding mediocrity. Those were the vision statements that I came up with. Those were 6. I guess one of them is kind of long in there, so maybe it's 7. But when I wrote that down, I was like, well, I've got 2 different things here. That I've got this, making the best of whatever I'm writing in the world. When I started thinking about making the best of whatever I'm writing, I was like, well, is that because I don't, the best of whatever? Like, well, what is the whatever? And for most people, that could be like, well, the best email campaigns, or the best ghostwritten copy, or the best press releases, or I'm making the best cookies, or the best steak sirloins, or any number of things, right? And I realized that I'm kind of stuck in between 2 spots. I've got feet in 2 worlds here, between being the best I can be as a writer and improving in that context, but also still having a lot of stuff that sucks me into this web design and development world. And I feel like I probably should pick one. That this gets back to almost the initial thing that we talked about in this book, where he said that the best people, in order to achieve their goals, is to commit to one thing. And as I started looking at this, I was like, I don't know that I've committed in a way that that they intend for people to commit. So, this was deep, right? And I think that if you really were interested in doing this, and if you thought to yourself, you know what, I really need some direction in my life about some of these things, I need something that forms the basis of what it is that I do every day, or to help me move from one area, or one career, or one expertise, or one job, or whatever, to something else. This might be a book worth picking up, just to sort of solidify your thoughts in that. If you sort of subbed in the notion of business or a company for yourself, or your life, or your career, I think a person can get a lot out of this. He continues in here about the second component of this. They break it down into 3 parts. The second component being of a vision is purpose. And he says, to make a personal analogy, purpose plays the role that a sense of life purpose can provide an individual. A person with a purpose will never be at a loss for meaningful work. Because he says, have you ever noticed that extraordinary people like Michelangelo, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Maslow, led productive, fulfilled lives right up to their deaths. They had a sense of purpose that could never be completed, a personal purpose. They had a sense of what it was that they needed to do, and that could never be completed. They would never be done. They could never submit themselves to the oblivion of unproductive retirement. Purpose in a company plays a similar motivating role. And I think there too is another underlining read between the lines sort of thing, is that he's arguing that people like Churchill and Roosevelt and Michelangelo and Maslow all had personal purposes in their life, and that he's saying that companies should, achieve for the same thing. And I think that the in between the lines there, you could say that he's agreeing with my assessment that this stuff works just as well for individuals as it does for companies. And as I started thinking a little bit about purpose, there's a component that allowed me to understand the difference between purpose and vision. And he writes, this process of asking multiple layers of why is powerful for getting at purpose. One very powerful why question is, why should we continue to exist? What would the world lose if we ceased to exist? And I'd argue here too that you could substitute, again, company for yourself. And that point would be, why should I continue to exist? What would the world lose if I ceased to exist? And he writes, note, this may seem like an odd question, but it's very effective for quickly getting to the core of purpose, why the company exists, or in your case, why you exist. Another powerful approach is to start with the statement, we make X products, and then ask why 5 times. We call this the 5 whys approach. After 5 whys, you'll find that you'll be getting down to the fundamental purpose of the business. And you could say the same thing for yourself. Like, if you started off with the question of why am I marrying this person? Okay, and then you give yourself a response. It's like, because I love them. Why? Because they make me laugh. Why? And you could keep doing that 5 times and ultimately get to the truth, the kernel, the nugget of what it is that you are so passionate about that person for. And I wrote down in my notes that purpose is why you exist, and it's never achieved. So if vision statements are a core belief and principle, a philosophy of life, if you will, the purpose statement is why you exist and is never achieved. And for me, I wrote down 2 things: to enhance knowledge and information that improves people's understanding of the world, and to write compelling stories. And when I did that, I realized, you know what? I've kind of got my foot in 2 of these worlds here, between making websites and doing writing and search optimization stuff. But these 2 things can coincide. They can coexist. They can be alongside each other, because the purpose of enhancing knowledge and information, in my case, through the web, that improves people's understanding of the world is totally in line with my goals and purpose to write compelling stories and to write compelling information that enables people to do something new or exciting with their life. And that was incredibly eye-opening for me. I think it can be for you too. And if you sit down and think about that, again, asking yourself 5 times, 5 whys about why it is that you exist or what the world would lose if you ceased to exist, then you can really get something out of that. I highlighted another nugget back here too. He writes about a construction company, and they set a goal here and said, to become a truly great construction company by the year 2000, brought to life with a vivid description composed of a dozen tangible images. These were, we will have consistently achieved the lowest possible safety modifier for a general contractor or for our size. We have built a major project that has been recognized in an industry magazine. Following a pilot plant project, we are invited back to build a major manufacturing facility without competition. And our friends back east will mention that they have heard about DPR's greatness. DPR is the company they're talking about here. Our families will say that we worked for a great company and that we are shortlisted on every project in which we expressed an interest. For 5 consecutive years, we never missed an opportunity to be asked back by one of our clients, and we are used by a reputable authority on business as an example of a great company. In addition, they continue to say we will receive letters from customers and subcontractors praising DPR and their efforts. We will have minorities and women in senior level estimator and project manager positions. A national magazine will have written a positive article about DPR and our success. and we will routinely receive unsolicited referrals for major projects. Excuse me. And when you think about that, that's an excellent example because it codifies a lot of things that I think a lot of companies don't think about, right? Like, we want to be a great company. Okay, how? Well, money. Right? That's where a lot of things start and end, right? We want to make a lot of money. We want to make $1 million, and usually it's a very specific thing. Like, we're going to make $1 million this year. We're going to double our revenue, or pick some relatively arbitrary, but maybe useful, but relatively arbitrary thing. For them to say things like, our friends will mention that they've heard about our greatness, or that our families will say that we work for a great company, or that we will have built a major project that's been recognized in an industry magazine. Those things are tangible. They are sort of audacious, and they give a mission to things. And this is the third component about in a purpose, a vision, and then there's a mission. And the mission is I wrote it down as the big hairy goal that is achievable. And so in this example that they were talking about, you could have, our friends think that they've read about us in a magazine, or that our families say that we work for a great company. When I think about the mission for myself, I came up with 4 mission statements. And I think that it's fine too. I think a lot of people get into the notion that each mission needs to be like one simple little line or something. I actually think that based off of the view of a lot of the things that are in here, the mission can be a lot of different things, so long as that it's sincere and authentic. He actually writes, like your values and purpose, your mission has to be sincere and authentic, something that you want to obtain badly enough that you're willing to make personal sacrifices for its attainment. And I think that for a lot of people, that we've all sort of got those background goals in our minds of like, well, I'd like to be things like, I'd like to lose weight, I'd like to do a triathlon, I'd like to learn the guitar, I'd like to grow my own food, I'd like to make sure the kids get into a good college, whatever it might be. Are you willing to sacrifice for those things? And so the mission that he's come to refer to as the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal. For me, this was to become a best-selling author of narrative nonfiction before I'm 40, turning 35 this year. To be recognized for making the best web pages in the world, establish myself as the successor to David McCullough, my favorite historian and author, and to be admired by everyone who reads my work. And will I achieve those things? I don't know. I'm actually not sold yet that some of these things are necessarily even achievable, because I don't know how I would define them. I don't know how to be admired by everyone who reads my work. I don't know how that works. Is that based off of Twitter followers? I don't know. So I still have some work to do in this thing. I think that one is very clear: to become a best-selling author of narrative nonfiction before I'm 40. I think that that's an obvious thing, right? There's obvious lists for this, and money, again, being a neutral indicator of value on some of those things, makes it obvious about how that works. My others that I had on there, like establishing myself as the successor to David McCullough. I don't know how that would work. I in my head I thought to myself, well, maybe somebody at a talk someplace like the Library of Congress. They have like the annual Library of Congress book festival and stuff like that. Maybe one of those things will somebody will say like, here's Justin, he wrote this book about such and such. We think that he's a natural successor to David McCullough. That could work, right? Is it something that would be easy to achieve? No. Is it achievable? Theoretically. Is it achievable for me? Probably not by the time I'm 40. Maybe by the time I'm 60, maybe. But he comes to talk too a little bit about Winston Churchill, and there's a highlight that I made here. It says, "I've come to see him more as the Winston Churchill of business," and he's talking about Steve Jobs here. He says, "A hyper-resilient soul who exemplified the simple mantra, never give in, never, 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 never." And I think that, again, that can be a little dangerous for some things. I think there's a time and place for giving up or moving on or changing strategies in just about everything. And I think that some of this could be sort of a romantic relic of a bygone era. But I think that having some grit and determination and consistency, when you combine them with a clear vision, purpose, and mission, can put you on a path to understand what it is that you're doing, why you're doing it, and sort of what your metric is, right? That old mantra of what gets measured gets fixed, I think works really well here. And I just think that the whole thing was a really interesting component to this. There was one bit in the back of the book here about business that I highlighted because I thought it was really interesting. And I think it's useful for anybody that works literally anywhere. I don't think you have to be a business owner necessarily to do this, but it says, simulate being the customer. He says, if your business is such that you can't literally be a customer of your own products, then simulate a way of being the customer. And there are two basic approaches. One approach is to solve the specific problem or fill the specific need of an individual customer, not an individual customer group, but a single, solitary individual customer. The idea here is the same as above. If you invent a solution to the problem of a single customer, chances are there are other potential customers hidden in their woodwork that would also be interested in the innovation. For example, baby powder was presented one day in 1890 when a physician wrote Fred Kilmer at Johnson & Johnson Laboratories that one of his patients complained of skin irritation from using a medicated plaster. To solve the problem, Kilmer sent the customer a small container of Italian talc. J&J then decided to include the talc with its plaster products, and soon thereafter, hundreds of customers came out of the woodwork asking for more of the powder, and Johnson's baby powder was born. A second approach is to get so close to the customer that you experience what the customer experiences. Don't work simply to know what your customers are, to know who your customers are, but to know them. The key is not to assemble reams of market data sheets, which are then analyzed, sorted, and interpreted. No, the key is to directly observe customer experience in the field in real time. It's much better to actually be there when the customer is wrestling with a certain problem or attempting to use one of your products or services than it is to ask him to later recall his experience. We call this the, quote, touch and feel approach. I thought that was just an excellent example of something that could be used by any number of people in any number of circumstances. This book has a purpose to it that's focused on business, but I think that there is so much more that's a little bit extra depth in some things. There was another nugget here. Focus keeps you from being just another also-ran player. Also-rans tend to fall in the worst possible strategic place, too small to take advantage of cost economies of scale, yet not differentiated enough to justify higher prices than the competition. To be stuck in the middle is deadly. And again, you can see how that absolutely works for companies and businesses, but I think it also works extremely well for people's professional careers. That if you're the sort of person who, you've got maybe a bachelor's degree and some experience, relatively small in the scale of things there, right? Not very differentiated to justify a higher salary in the market. But if you can diversify your skills in some useful way, or do things that other people seem relatively unwilling to do that are rare and valuable, then you can increase your salary, right? And so you think about that from a corporate revenue standpoint. I think about it from a individual, career development standpoint. There's a nugget in here too about what it takes, the 6 basic elements of what it takes to be an innovative company. And he writes, receptivity to ideas from everywhere. 2, being the customer, which we just spoke about. 3, experimentation and mistakes. 4, people being creative. 5, autonomy and decentralization. And 6, rewards. And rewards can be compensation through money as well. But a lot of these things, and they go through a lot of these elements in detail. Well worth it. If you're curious about whether or not you work at a great company, you could read this and identify if your company does any of these 6 things. And then you can be like, you know what? I don't actually work at a great company at all. You probably already knew that if you already suspected it. But then you can at least empirically say, hey, boss, we don't do any of these things. And that's a problem. There was another acronym back here that's called SMAC. And it's SM lowercase a C with a hard K pronunciation. SMAC stands for specific, methodical, and consistent, which again, super useful for individual people to be. People like it when people are specific, methodical, and consistent. He says, smack is much more than a catchy and useful word. Smack is a mindset. It's a way of thinking, a way of acting, a way of keeping your wits and executing in chaos, a way of focusing on the right details, a way of getting the right details right. A former member of my research team who served in the U.S. Marine Corps once shared a story about a Marine Corps helicopter mechanic that perfectly illustrates the essence of the smack mindset. Picture a helicopter mechanic in a war zone. A helicopter has engine trouble and can't take off. Mortars are exploding nearby. Bullets are popping and snapping and whizzing and zinging about. And amidst the chaos and the noise and the smoke and the yelling and the confusion, the mechanic opens the engine compartment, works quickly, fixes the problem, and clambers down to the ground. More bullets, more mortars, more noise, more fear. But before the mechanic gives the pilot the thumbs up, he methodically lays out all his tools on the ground and counts them. Literally counts every single one, making sure that in the melee and anxiety, he didn't inadvertently leave a tool in the engine that would crash the helicopter. He also gives an instance here about a researcher or a doctor at the Cleveland Clinic. He says, when Joanne and I had the opportunity to observe an open heart surgery at the Cleveland Clinic, we witnessed a process that exuded smack, backup systems, checklists, communication protocols, and the surgical assistants counting each and every surgical device, just like the helicopter mechanic. Smack saves lives. I thought that was an excellent bit of useful information that, again, applies great for company processes and applies great for anything that anybody can do in their own individual processes, whether at work or even at home, right? It could be a sort of a nighttime routine or process for handling the kids and getting their homework ready, or even cooking, for example. And as a final nugget here about 5 basic conditions under which people tend to execute well, he writes, 1, people execute well if they're clear on what they need to do. How can people possibly do well if they don't have a clear idea of what doing well means, if they don't have clear goals, benchmarks, and expectations? 2, people execute well if they have the right skills for the job. The right skills come from talents, temperament, and proper training. I would add to myself that can come individually from your own education and practice. 3, people execute well if they're given freedom and support. No one does a good job with people looking over his shoulder. When people are treated like children, they'll lower themselves to those expectations. Also, people need the tools and support to do their job well. To use an extreme illustration, imagine how difficult it would be for FedEx employees to make on-time delivery without reliable trucks. 4, people execute well if they're appreciated for their efforts. All people want their efforts to be appreciated. We've consciously chosen this term, appreciated rather than rewarded, because it more accurately captures the excellent performer's value, respect, and appreciation as much as, and often even more than, money. And 5, people execute well if they see the importance of their work. And, I initially went into this book and I was kind of bored by the introduction of it. It may be like the episode of this show. I don't know, that it started off kind of rocky and that you're not really sure of things, but I give it 4 stars. I think that you'll like this if you're a person who's interested in informative and reflective work. I think it can help you develop a strategy, whether that's fast or even slow growth of things. I put some of the stuff in my notes, but we didn't talk about it today. But if you think about, just at the very least, the first 3 or 4 chapters in this book about purpose, mission, and vision, that can give you some clarity for some things. I think that historically, a person could argue that we did this largely through religion or sort of cultural pressure or change around us. Men did this because women did that, and we did this for survival, kind of a thing, right? And we as a people are sort of beyond a lot of that. Not most office workers, most knowledge workers, most white collar people, and even a lot of blue collar people, we don't really work so much with the intent of growing our own food, right? Like, our food needs and things are plentiful, that we've been able to sort of develop a culture and society that allows us to do things that our ancestors would never have even thought to be able to do, because they spent all their time just trying to survive against nature, right? And as human beings, when your job is to survive, we need to go out and kill the buffalo, or we need to go out and grow the wheat or whatever because we need to be able to live. It's a very clear vision, right? I need to do this so that way I can grow that and then eat it so I can live. That's very clear, right? And that as we've extracted some of that away, extrapolated some of that away, and abstracted some of that away, our purpose and our vision in our lives is not as clear as it used to be. And I think we would all do well to try and bring some of that back. I think this is a good book that can introduce that. There are probably better books about some of these things individually, but I think as an overview, it's very good. I think it's well researched, and I think it's useful for businesses, certainly, and entrepreneurs and managers that have some autonomy and control over what it is they're doing every day, but also can be extremely useful for individuals who just want a useful way of exercising their own beliefs and understanding kind of where they are professionally and as individuals and with their relationships. I gave it 4 stars.